and welcome to Radical Engagements here at Varnblog. And we are talking about Bordiga and the Lyon theses from 1926, 25. And the history around. We've done a series of articles so far, preparing for this because there's a whole lot of context and left communism is pretty obscure. We are in the middle of the 2000 edition of the International Communist Party's introduction to the Lyon theses by Bordiga. I had commented priorly that this series of text was in many ways more sectarian by the 2000s and more abrasive, and seemed to buy some of the misbeliefs actually by Togliatti around Gramsci and the center of the party in ways the earlier 1970 introduction did not. But when we got into the hyperbole around it was super frustrating in the beginning, but we got into the historical section of this introduction and it got much more substantive. We are still in that historical section, so we're going to go back today and see where we end up with this 2000 introduction. We will get into that right now. All right. So here's the ICP's piece, the International Communist Party. Quote, even from the organizational point of view, opting for Lyon as a venue for the Congress wasn't a very judicious choice. Indeed, it wasn't so much due to a matter of security as to precise political maneuver. The Federation of Milan, which had managed to retain an effective organization in which amongst its members were the leaders of the party's underground organization, known as La Ufficio 1, Office 1, had offered the party's leadership the center a suitable venue for a clandestine meeting in Milan. Dozens of meeting places were offered, with defense and security guaranteed by hundreds of experienced and trustworthy comrades. The center turned down the offer without even checking if it was feasible. It had already been decided that the meeting was going to be held abroad. In order to get the Congress, the delegates already under police surveillance had to cross the French border in secret. Their stay in France had to be just as secret because most of them possessed fake documents. And once they arrived in Lyon, the delegates had to meet in secret, moving from place to place because the police were trying to track them down. Therefore, once the Congress was over, their return to Italy was also illegal. But having the Congress in France allowed for the leadership to have total and exclusive control over which delegates participated in the Congress. And this actually explains to me something that I'd never figured out, even in the other historical writing, why they had this in Lyon and why so few of the communist delegates in the party were able to show up, because that was part of the thing here. The fact that 70 or so delegates were able to cross the frontier under the nose of the border guards is considered an enormous success by the Stalinist hagiography, and it's a clear example of excellent functioning of the party's illegal apparatus, but now purged of left members. That, on the contrary, the Italian police knew their job very well is demonstrated not only by the fact that more than one of the participants at the Congress was arrested on returning to Italy, but above all, that the fascist police had managed to identify Lyon as a venue of the Congress, kept track of at least some of the more prominent representatives, and to have obtained direct from France a detailed account of the progress of the Congress's proceedings. At this point, we should ask how the entire Congress committee passing under the nose of the guards was due to the skill of the leaderships of the Communist Party of Italy's underground apparatus, and how much was instead to fascism's wish to allow the Congress proceeding to be left undisturbed. Benito Mussolini, an ex-left-wing revolutionary, much have enjoyed what was going on inside the Communist Party, the only genuine anti-fascist party, not because it was democratic, but because it was anti-capitalist, seeing the pro-Stalinist and therefore pro-Russian wing of the leading an extremely violent battle, pulling no punches to overpower and drive out the revolutionary current from the party once and for all. And that is also a little weird, how much the fascists knew about this, and yet it still happened. I've read that before. Some people in the Marxist-Leninist bureaucracy actually blame Bordiga for this, but that seems highly unlikely. A clear example of how the party had been prepared to defeat the left we can see in La Unida, or the Unity article, June 12, 1925, entitled Internal Democracy and the Freedom of Discussion. It provides clear evidence of the Jesuitism of the centrist. Oh, I do love how how Italians love making references to the Catholic Church. Anyway, back to the text. In a few words, the article announces more than 6 months before the event, whatever the Congress's verdict, this interest would win anyway, because they were on the same side as the International. Quote, the comrades in the Comito de Intesta reason in this way. The principle of democratic centralism is only valid in periods between Congresses. In periods just before the Congress, things, however, change. The Central Committee stays in charge to get the current business dealt with in order to ensure continuity in the functioning of the party, but has no right to make use of its position to use its power to further interests of the current of thought whose exponent they are. They should place themselves on the terms of free competition with other currents and on the same terms. This conception is profoundly erroneous. We state this without being guilty of party Giacomism. The theses we are contesting would be correct if the program and derivatives of the Communist Party derived from no other source than free discussion and competition between ideas, and the CC, no other investiture than that of the electoral response of the party membership. In the Communist Party, things are different. The membership of a particular party is not unique, arbitrator, and can't make sovereign decisions about the rightness or correctness of various opinions and currents. This is always an opinion or current that is in a privileged position that must prevail and must be made to prevail, and so is taken up by the Communist International, accepted and sanguined by the word of congressmen of all sections of the International. Yeah, that... You wonder why communists from this time period had a reputation of talking out both sides of their mouth constantly. When you read this stuff, like, who can take this at face value? I mean, interestingly, this actually reflects the position of the ICP in some ways, that the invariant program doesn't change regardless of membership or material conditions. So, but at least they admitted it's anti-democratic, whereas opposed to the democratic centralists who have the same position, except that it's less rigid and more toying in line with Moscow and whatever the Comintern's doing at this time, and also trying to claim that there is a time for and against democratic centralism. I mean, democratic centralism is itself problematic, as I'm going to cover in another series, but nonetheless. First of all, the article is an obvious confession that the centrist faction was a clear minority inside the party. Yeah, that's historical fact, too. But apart from this, the pre-select methodology is very much in evidence. The centrists seeming to be raised a correct idea, and one which the Italian left had already defended, namely that it isn't admissible for a communist party to carry out policies at the local level which run contrary to those sanctioned by the international congresses. It was the Italian left who repeatedly affirmed this requirement, adding, moreover, that at the head of the national party had to be the representatives of the current which would best harmonize the Comintern's directives. And in proof of the maximum coherence with which the left professed, it was given in 1923 when it spontaneously gave up, after our insistent request, the leadership of the party, despite the fact that virtually the entire membership subscribed to its policies, because it was out of step with the Comintern. That's far in adding that, but that is what they did. The left never asked for democratic guarantees, as to never recognize the thaumaturgical function of the democratic method. Democracy has always been considered by communists a tool of deception through which the dominant class exerts its dictatorship. Marx says differently because he separates bourgeois and generic democracy, but I'm not going to get into that here. Bordiga ignored those passages. The fact that democratic method may be utilized even by the party of the working class during certain phases of its development certainly does not mean that communists accept it on principle. In fact, sooner they emerge from that phase, the better. The party had already stated in 1922 that, quote, it is not a good thing to make a principle of employing the democratic mechanism. Alongside its duty to consult, analogous to the legislative function of the state apparatus, the party has an executive responsibility which it directly corresponds, during the supreme moment of struggle, to that of the army, and requires a maximum hierarchical discipline. Asterisk. It's hard for me to believe that these people are serious about a classless society when they talk about hierarchical discipline with non-elected leaders that are not provisional like this. It is very hard for me to take that seriously. It's like we like communism, but the actual communist part. Kind of like with market socialism too. It's like we like non-exploitation except for a market to work as an information mechanism. Exploitation is required. All right. We can't see how the majority of the party can be expected to aphoristically, prioristically, that's a weird word, make this right decision if it was an infallible judge, even in an organization like a party where the composition of membership is a result of selection through voluntary and spontaneous commitment and the regulation of recruitment. The majority's verdict is not per se the best one. The democratic mechanism has been, for us, a material tool instrumental in the construction of our internal organs and formulations of our status. It is not an indispensable policy. This is why we will never make a principle of the famous organizational formula democratic centralism. For us, democracy has never been a principle. The democratic principle, Regina Communista, number 18, February 1922. Now, I'm going to go into the problems with democratic centralism, but that isn't one of the problems with them. Like, this is basically saying we only use democratic methods when it suits our means. Although what our means are and what our ends are never really clear. Back in 1922, the left had already hoping for a democratic centralism formula would be dropped, proposing that the communists base its organization on organic centralism. This is unique to the Italian left, and it's mostly unique to Bordiga. And we're going to have to clarify what it is because it really gets stated in its most clear form in the Lyon theses. And this is the stuff that I've always found rhymes with technocracy and is not all that interested in classlessness, unless the only thing you care about is exploitation, not other forms of class struggle, which, again, Lenin and Marx are very clear that they do. Clearly, this represents a point of arrival when the correct tactical policies has managed to arrive at complete homogeneity within the party. See, this focus on homogeneity is all over the place. And beyond currents and fractions. So we don't have a fraction ban because it would hurt us, but also we don't need fractions because the party will eventually be homogeneous and expand and engage in, this is... The amount of faith you have to have for this to be correct is actually pretty astounding. To reject and repress the democratic process in the existence of fractions. See, we don't want a fraction ban, but we don't want fractions either. While maintaining its democratic form of consultation and engaging during the Congress in the most bitter political battle against dissenters represented a clear example of fractionalism from above and adopted the worst of the democratic method, i.e. Gialatti's. By exploiting the fact that it was impossible for many sections to get their votes sent through and maneuvering the leadership that would dramatically distort the fact that the left's still predominant majority in the party, that was true, which was admitted to even by the centrists. However, at the time of the Lyon Congress, despite all the ruses deployed by the center, the left still retained a majority vote inside the party. Despite its filters put in their way by the party leaders at Lyon, there was roughly equivalent number of delegates on both sides. And as for the famous base, it was extremely difficult to consult because the fascists, as everyone was well aware, were controlling Italy, and therefore section meetings, and especially the provincial federation congresses, hadn't been effective due to the need for all activity to be conducted in secret. Still, the centrist leaders had a rather clever idea. It arranged that any registered party member who wasn't managed to cast a vote, either for the leadership or the left, would be calculated as having voted in favor of the leadership's theses. Even the possibility of abstaining was denied, as many abstentions were calculated as having voted for the Gramscian Center as well. Considering the preparatory work for the Congresses started back in 1925, the membership roll was, in theory, that of 1925 anyway. If the last effective voting strength at Lyon was 10% of the previous year's membership, it was easy to attribute to the center 90%, which was claimed. Further evidence that the parliamentarianist method really put down its roots in the international and the Italian party's leadership is provided by the fact, in the name of the most noxious bourgeois democratic hypocrisies, the representation of minorities, that the left was forced on pain of expulsion if it was refused to join the new leadership of the party. The left's representatives, just as they had been voluntarily surrendered at direction of the party to Gramsci's group in 1923, were refusing now to participate in the leadership, not to sabotage the party, not in the spirit of fractionism, but because it considered it inadmissible to take on the burden of an executive whom they considered to be in conflict with the programmatic foundations of revolutionary Marxism. The left proposal was, as usual, a very loyal one. Quote, "We'll give you assurances that we will not engage in fractionist work, that we will not attempt to carry out the fractionist activity. We will also reiterate that our efforts to collaborate on the periphery of the party, but wish to be excluded from participation in the leadership. On the other hand, since there's nothing in our statutes that compel us to do so, we beg you not to impose this measure by force." I mean, it's interesting to me that that on one hand, this group is seeing the problems of fractionalism from above and how it can't be loyal. And on the other hand, it's trying to deny that it also buys into the very zero-sum logic that makes fractionalisms always develop and exist at force of expulsion. I mean, it's very easy to be popular when you shut everyone else out. And it just seems to me ironic that in some ways the very organic centralism that these people are arguing for is being used against them through parliamentarianist methods, and they hate it. Humbert Droz, the Comintern's representative, threatened the left comrades that, quote, they must work clearly within the party in an active manner in the post that they are appointed to, or else they will be expelled. This came about two of the communist left comrades, the current members of Menshevism, anarchism, syndicalism, and opportunism. I love how they list them all together, as if they're the same thing, were obliged to join the party central committee. The Lyon congresses would conclude with a statement from the left openly condemn the traitors on the march, citing not so much as a fraudulent vote count, but rather the hypocritical sham of putting two men on the left in the new leadership. Against such use of methods, and the outcome would have been obtained in a fraudulent manner, the left had no recourse but to appeal to the Comintern's Control Commission. The Control Commission refused to examine the left's accusation against the Communist Party leadership, and why would they? They set it up. And this official complaint, nothing further was heard. In 1970, in our collection of fundamental party text in defense of the Communist Party program, we wrote, the Lyon Congress took place only a few months after the Russian Party's 14th Congress, which virtually the entire Bolshevik old guard, starting with Kamenev and Zinoviev, rose up in a protest as passionate as it was unexpected against the establishment of the NEP, against the peasants and rent yourself slogan of Bukharin and the Red Professors, and against the stifling regime installed by Stalin within the party. Only a month after the Lyon Congress, the sixth enlarged executive of the Communist International would turn the big guns of bureaucratic oratory not only on the international force which stood and denounced the profound crisis in the Comintern, the Italian left, in fact, and thereby paved the way for the later stigmatization of the Russian opposition in November and December. And also with the Italian left being accused of being Trotskyist, only some of which were. The international communist movement had reached its fatal crossroads, and just as the 14th Congress of the Russian Communist Party, Kamenev, Zinoviev, and Krupskaya had been conscious of expressing in their words the revolt of one set of the social and material forces against another within the ambit of the Russian state. Forces were within 1,000 times more powerful than particular individuals taking place at the rostrums. So on the international plane, the Italian left knew that its body of draft theses, which as usual overstepped the narrow confines of the Italian question and examined the entire global field of communist tactics, was an expression of a historic course within the space of a few months would flow through China, and due to the rare and for many years unique convergences of objective circumstances, England, that through both semi-colonial country and the imperialist metropolis par excellence. The year of the supreme test was 1926, and in the final analysis, the outcome of the titanic struggles fought by the Chinese workers and peasants and the British proletariat would determine the destiny of both the Soviet Russia and the Communist International. During 1926, the Russian opposition would sense the terrible urgency of the unraveling the tangled knots which were building up in the tooth comb of history, and Trotsky and Zinoviev would smooth over past differences in order to form a desperate coalition against the looming peril of the counter-revolutionary forces. Trotsky in particular put up a remarkable fight, emerged defeated only by the end of 1927. The defeat of the Russian opposition, the failure of the Chinese Revolution, and the defeat of the general strike in England will mark the destruction of the entire international communist movement. The rebirth of the World Communist Party and a move back to the advanced revolutionary terrain by proletarians the world over would require that we obstinately and insurgently revive and follow the program which was cast in 1926. Which, of course, only Bordigists do, and Bordigists are one of the smallest factions of the left, so here we are. Even if they are right, they cannot build up anything but wait seemingly eternally for their moment to come again. We'll go into the theses and what I think specifically is right and wrong about them. And I, like I've mentioned, writing an article about this. And I'm also going to go over in other episodes articles of Bordiga's writing that I actually like and was inspired by, because I don't think he should be tossed out. Look, I don't even think everything Stalin writes is bad, despite being accused of being somewhat correctly skeptical of Marxist-Leninism a la Stalin, and while I'm more sympathetic to the Maoist variants, pretty strongly skeptical of things that come out of there too, at least in regards to the Sino-Soviet split after 1960. We will come back to this later. Obviously, the series will continue by going into the actual Lyon theses finally. I hope you get something out of this and understand that a lot of what we think of as like, oh, it's just a battle between Marxist Leninism and Trotskyism is a very misunderstood way of framing, and a way too simple, binary, almost Manichaean way of framing the left communist, the left opposition, the right opposition, the right deviationist, etc. In the context of the 1920s and 30s, and how the flip-flopping all over the place really affected people's trust in the Communist Party, which they only gained back temporarily and very temporarily during the Popular Front period. But since they were now wedded to bourgeois parties when the war footing was over, the very thing that made them increditing and resisting fascists discredited them in ruling in coalitions afterwards. We're going to come back to that, and that's going to be a major theme of history. Today, people who find Marxist-Leninism on the internet often find so through shadowy YouTube figures who, I don't know, defend Romanian communism or Evra Hoxha or something as a pastime, finding the weirdest and hardest to defend cases to try to defend almost as an aesthetic thing without going into a lot of the material analysis at all. Are the communist divisions or why they existed? I find this to be not just irresponsible, but basically rendering communism as a mere aesthetic to be put on by children. And on that note, over and out. Like and subscribe, hit the bell. There's a lot more behind the Patreon. We're going through a series on all kinds of stuff. I'm going through scholarly articles on the development of Stalin and Bukharin's thought. I'm doing more stuff on the communist left, stuff on anarchism and its relationship to Marxism and the questions that emerge from both sides, etc., etc. So if you're interested, go on Patreon, subscribe for as little as $3, and you'll have access for that, plus Q&As. And we will continue moving on. Thank you for your support. Bye-bye.